It's amazing, isn't it? Just when you think you've got a grasp on the economy, like, things are making sense, boom, something throws you for a loop.
It really does make you realize how much we simplify these big systems.
Right.
We try to make sense of it all. And then March 2025 hits. A total curveball, right?
It really shook things up, that's for sure. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. We're talking about frankly, it was a surge in U.S. layoffs this past March. And, not just any layoffs.
No, not at all. These are directly connected to the Department of Government Efficiency. That's DOGE, as I'm sure many of you have heard by now.
Mm.
And, of course, Elon Musk's leadership there under the Trump administration. I mean, can you believe that? Trump back in office.
And hey, before we get too deep, just want to be transparent. We've got a whole stack of reports and articles here. Challenger, Gray and Christmas, MoneyWatch, CNN, CNBC, Dow Jones, Newswires, you name it. We're taking it all in to give you the full picture.
Absolutely. Got to look at it from all angles.
So for everyone listening, today's goal is pretty straightforward. We're breaking down just how huge these DOGE layoffs were, like the actual numbers. Then we'll get into the why, the motivation behind it all. And finally, we'll explore what this could mean for, everyone, really, the people who lost their jobs, the economy as a whole. I think we all want to know what happens next.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So first things first, how many jobs are we even talking about here?
All right, straight to the numbers. Across the U.S., announced job cuts in March reached a total of, get this, 275,240.
Whoa, that's a lot of jobs, right?
It's huge.
But is that like a normal amount for, economic ups and downs or?
Oh, no. To put that in perspective, that's the third highest monthly total ever.
Seriously?
Yeah. The only times we've seen higher numbers were during the peak of those pandemic lockdowns back in April and May 2020. I mean, we're talking 671,129 in April and 397,016 in May. When everything shut down.
So basically, these numbers are on par with some of the worst economic times we've had recently.
Pretty much. And the year-over-year increase is just wild.
How much higher are we talking?
So March 2025, like we said, 275,240. Go back to March 2024, only 90,309 cuts.
So more than double.
Way more, yeah. A lapping 205% increase.
And compared to February, just last month.
Still a huge jump. Up 60% from February.
Okay, so the numbers are massive. Now let's zoom in on DOGE. How much of this can we lay at their feet?
They're the main culprit here. DOGE was responsible for over, get this, 216,000 federal job cuts in March.
Whoa. So some reports say 215,215, others 216,670.
Yeah, there's slight variation.
But the point is over 216,000. That's
almost 80% of all those announced layoffs.
So basically 8 out of every 10 jobs lost in March were because of DOGE.
Yep. And Andrew Challenger from Challenger, Gray and Christmas said it best. Without DOGE, March would have been, quote, a fairly quiet month for layoffs, end quote. Imagine that.
Yeah. It really puts it in perspective, right? This one entity having that much impact.
Right.
Okay, so we've got the what. Now let's dig into the why. Why create DOGE in the first place? What was the goal here?
Okay, so Elon Musk has been pretty upfront about this. He wants to, quote, root out waste and abuse in the government. That's the whole DOGE philosophy.
Streamlining, cutting inefficiencies, all that.
Exactly. And the effects were immediate.
I bet. Like, what were people seeing, experiencing?
Well, think about the Social Security Administration, the IRS, those everyday services that people depend on. Suddenly, there were massive delays. Customer service went out the window.
I can only imagine the frustration.
It was rough. And some smaller agencies, they just got shut down entirely.
Wow. Were there any specific departments that were hit especially hard right off the bat?
Yeah. The Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, took a big hit early on. We saw cuts at the CDC, the FDA.
Oh, that's worrisome.
And the report's suggesting even bigger cuts are coming for other departments.
Like which ones? And for the people listening, how might these cuts affect you directly? Think about the services you rely on.
Well, they're talking about maybe 80,000 jobs cut from the VA.
The Veterans Affairs Department, that's huge.
Yeah, and the IRS is looking at losing about 18,000 employees. The Treasury is also bracing for, quote, substantial job losses.
These are major departments. People depend on these services.
Absolutely.
So we're seeing this massive wave of layoffs, all focused on the federal government. But let's pull back for a second. How does this fit into the bigger economic picture? Are other indicators showing similar job losses?
Right. So if you look beyond the DOGE layoffs, things are, they're a bit mixed. Initial weekly unemployment claims actually went down a little the week ending March 22nd, down to 219,000 from 225,000 the week before.
So less people filing for unemployment for the first time. That sounds kind of good, right?
Well, it's not that simple.
There's always more to it, isn't there?
Always. So while those initial claims were down, continuing claims actually went up. Those are the people who are still unemployed after a week. They hit 1.9 million for the week, ending March 22nd.
So more people staying unemployed for longer periods?
Exactly. And that's the highest it's been since November 2021. It suggests that it's harder for those laid off to find new jobs, especially compared to those in other sectors.
So what about those specifically laid off by DOGE? How were their unemployment filings looking?
Yeah, so federal worker filings went down to 564 for the week ending March 22nd. That's down from 821 the week before. But, and this is important, it's still higher than the same week last year, which was only 371.
So a bit of a spag there.
Yeah.
And what about that big monthly jobs report that everyone watches, the one that was due out on April 4th?
Yeah, the general expectation was for a slowdown in hiring. Economists were predicting something like 130,000 new jobs added in March, down from 151,000 in February.
So a smaller increase in jobs than the month before.
Right. And they were also predicting a slight uptick in the unemployment rate, maybe to 4.2% from 4.1%.
So potentially the effects of these DOGE layoffs are starting to ripple out into the broader economy?
It's looking that way.
Okay, so with all this in mind, what are economists saying about the potential long-term effects of these massive DOGE layoffs?
Yeah, there's some serious concern. Gregory Dacko, chief economist at EY Parthenon, he used a really striking phrase. He called these cuts, and I quote, indiscriminate and rapid.
That sounds pretty alarming.
It is. He's worried about the potential domino effect, what he calls spillover effects, hitting the private sector.
So what does that look like in real terms? What are the potential consequences of these spillover effects?
Think about it. You have a whole bunch of people suddenly without jobs. That means less spending, which hurts businesses. Demand for goods and services goes down. And industries that rely on government contracts, they're in trouble too.
It's chain reaction.
Exactly. And it's even worse in places with a lot of federal workers like Washington, D.C. They've already had a staggering 278,711 announced layoffs this year.
Wow. And what does that do to a local economy like that?
It's devastating. You typically see real estate take a hit, local businesses suffer. People just aren't spending money like they used to.
And the effects of DOGE, could they reach even further?
Oh, yeah. Analysts at Evercore ISI, they're estimating that DOGE's actions could directly or indirectly cut almost 500,000 jobs this year, nationwide.
500,000 jobs. That's a huge number.
It is.
So while DOGE is definitely the big story here, were there any other significant layoff trends in March outside the government?
Yeah, there were about 59,000 job cuts announced in the private sector, mostly in tech and retail.
Anything specific driving those cuts?
It's likely a combination of factors: ongoing restructuring in the tech industry, shifts in consumer demand for retail.
Right. And what about those job losses tied to specific Trump administration policies, like ending contracts or cutting aid?
Yep. That resulted in another 4,429 job cuts, mostly affecting nonprofits and healthcare organizations.
So with all these layoffs happening, what about future hiring? Are companies still looking to grow?
Well, that's the concerning part. Companies have announced plans to hire about 54,000 workers this year. Sounds like a lot, right? But that's a 16% drop compared to what they were planning last year at this time. And get this, it's the lowest planned hiring at the start of a year since 2012.
Wow. That definitely suggests some hesitancy from employers.
Absolutely.
So with all this information swirling around, what's the key takeaway for our listeners?
Okay, bottom line. The U.S. job market took a massive hit in March 2025, a historic hit. And DOGE is the main reason. These federal job cuts are unlike anything we've seen in recent history, except for maybe during major recessions.
And the consequences could go far beyond just government services.
Absolutely. We're talking about potential instability in key agencies, a ripple effect that could weaken the entire economy. And it all happens so fast.
It's a lot to take in. So for everyone listening, think about this. What's the right balance between making government more efficient and potentially causing huge disruptions? What other consequences might we see down the road? What about our communities, the services we rely on, the economy years from now?
This whole situation shows how interconnected everything is. One big change can have a domino effect. We really encourage you to think critically about what you've heard today, look at the sources we discussed, and form your own opinions. What does this all mean for the future?